Some feelings naturally arise within a person. Some desires, some emotions take over so completely that it becomes difficult to control oneself. I too was slowly crossing the thresholds of age, and my emotions wouldn't let me rest. All the time a strange longing would rise within me, a longing for someone to love me, to care for me. Especially at night, I would spend hours tossing and turning, a restless unease spreading through my body. Sometimes I would even get up in the middle of the night and pour cold water over myself, but none of this solved my problem. The solution to my problem was just one word: marriage. I had turned 24, and I was still sitting in my mother's home. By this age, the girls I grew up with had already become mothers to 2 children, while I was left yearning for my beloved. Sometimes a romantic scene on TV or a similar moment in a movie would ignite my emotions. When I saw a man holding a woman close, or when I watched married couples expressing their love, or lovers so lost in each other's eyes, my heart would long for the same. There was a park right in front of our house. In the evenings, when I would go up to the roof, I could clearly see the scenes in the park. The way the boys and girls there were so absorbed in each other, holding hands, crossing the milestones of love, it made me deeply yearn for someone in my life who could hold my hand, who could confess their love to me. But perhaps love is destined only for beautiful girls. And I was not beautiful, at least not in the eyes of the world. Every potential match that came to our door would reject me. No boy ever turned back for a second glance. As I grew older, my inferiority complex intensified. I constantly stood in front of the mirror examining myself. I would look at my face, my complexion, my features, my eyes. There was nothing about me that might make someone want to include me in their life. All these thoughts not only left me restless, but also made me deeply dissatisfied with my life. But I wasn't alone in bearing this burden. My mother was my constant companion in this journey. If I was struggling with not getting engaged, my mother was even more worried about it. She was perpetually anxious over the matter. This morning I had been watching my mother. Tears filled her eyes as she sat with her head in her hands. Just a while ago, a matchmaker had called and bluntly stated that there was no chance of my daughter getting engaged. "I won't bring any more prospective matches to your house. I have my own expenses." And then the boy's family has so many complaints, saying, "What kind of girl did you show us?" Those were the words that had driven my mother to tears. I was sweeping the courtyard while keeping an eye on my mother's distress. If I said anything to her at that moment, she would have turned her frustration on me. So I kept quiet and finished my chores. But when I went back to her, I saw her breaking down completely. I couldn't help it anymore. I placed my hand on her shoulder and sat down beside her. My own heart was heavy with grief. My own dreams had burned away, but seeing my mother in pain was even harder to bear. Some desires burn so intensely within a person that they almost defy reason. Certain emotions grip you in such a way that suppressing them feels impossible. I too was crossing that stage in life, where those feelings came to the forefront, where dreams of companionship and love filled every empty moment. I longed for a partner, someone who would hold my hand, understand my unspoken words, and share my burdens. But reality painted a far different picture. Every time a marriage proposal came to the house, I was rejected without a second thought. Boys would glance once and never look again, and over time, this pattern carved deep scars into my self-esteem. My mother, though loving, often expressed her frustrations through sharp remarks. "Why would anyone accept you?" she'd say bitterly. "Look at your color, your height, your features. What man would choose a girl like you?" These words weren't new to me, but hearing them again and again only deepened my pain. She was anxious, desperate even, to see me married. But she didn't realize how her comments fed the flames of my insecurities. On some days, it felt as though her worry was as much a burden as the societal pressure weighing on my shoulders. She'd tell me, "Shagufta, you are my daughter, born from my own womb. I love you more than anything, but your fate, your destiny, has terrified me. I wish you had taken after your father or me. Instead, you resemble those who have only brought me heartache." Her voice would crack, and her eyes would glisten with unshed tears. It wasn't that she truly despised me. It was the fear of what my future held. No matter how hard she tried, my mother could not mask the disappointment that came with every rejected proposal. I looked nothing like her or my father, who were both fair-skinned and tall. Instead, I resembled my aunt, who shared my shorter stature, darker complexion, and broader nose. It was my curse. At least that's how I came to see it. This resemblance had become my original sin, the unforgivable flaw that no one could overlook. Recently, one matchmaker had examined me like an object, dissecting every aspect of my appearance, and had then declined to return with any more proposals. Her refusal stung, but what hurt even more were the words she left behind. She had dissected my color, my height, my entire being, leaving me stripped of any remaining confidence. I felt like I'd been flayed bare, judged for something I had no hand in creating. Afterwards, I tried to comfort my mother. "There's no point in crying, Amma," I said. "These things are beyond our control." But my mother's anguish only grew. "You're already past 24, and I fear the years will slip away. What will happen when your hair turns gray and you're still here? Your father is gone, and the responsibility is mine alone. I'm sick, you know that. The doctor told me today that I might not have much time left. How can I not be afraid for you?" Her words broke my heart. I wanted to tell her to stop worrying so much, to trust that everything would fall into place when the time was right. "Amma, leave these matters to Allah," I said softly. "If marriage is written in my fate, it will happen. And if not, then I'll spend my life taking care of you." My mother's tears and my own fears weighed heavily on me, but I pulled her close and tried to calm her. Her blood pressure had been dangerously high all day, and she had already taken her medication twice. I was scared that something might happen to her, that my worst fear might come true. And then it did. Around 8 in the evening, my mother's blood pressure spiked, and she began to pound her head against the wall in distress. Panic-stricken, I called a rickshaw and rushed her to the hospital. In the emergency room, the doctor worked quickly, administering medications and checking her condition. He then pulled me aside. "You need to stop worrying your mother like this," he said bluntly. "If her stress levels remain this high, it won't be long before she—" He trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. My heart sank. "I'm serious," he continued. "It's not easy to say, but if her tension stays at this level, she may not make it." The weight of his words crushed me. As much as I hated hearing them, I couldn't ignore the truth. I was frantic. I couldn't let anything happen to my mother. She was all I had. After helping her out to a bench in the waiting area, I went to the pharmacy to get her prescriptions. Every step I took was heavy, each one marked by the overwhelming thought, "Amma must not fall apart." Back at the bench, I handed her the medications. The exhaustion on her face mirrored the despair in my heart. Her struggle had become mine. All my personal desires and longings seemed irrelevant now. All that mattered was her well-being, her survival. The next day, as I returned from the hospital pharmacy, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. My mother, who never spoke much to strangers, let alone men, was sitting in our courtyard, engaged in a quiet conversation with an elderly man. He must have been at least 60. His hair was silver, his clothes simple, and his demeanor composed. I didn't recognize him, and that alone made my heart race. Who was this man? And what was he doing in our home? I approached cautiously, the echo of my mother's stifled sobs from last night still fresh in my mind. Before I could say a word, my mother turned toward me and introduced him. "Shagufta, this is my daughter," she said softly, as if her voice might crack. Then she glanced back at him and said, "She's the reason I ended up in the hospital. All the stress." The old man raised a hand in a calming gesture. "Don't worry," he said with an assured tone. "I'll come to your house tomorrow and help you. This issue will be resolved." With those parting words, he stood and left, his steps steady and deliberate, as though he'd just made a decision that would change everything. My mind buzzed with questions. Who was he? What did he mean by resolving my issue? I turned to my mother, searching for answers, but she avoided my eyes. "Amma," I said, my voice firm yet edged with unease. "Who was that man, and why did you invite him here?" My mother finally met my gaze, her expression conflicted. Beta, she said, her voice wavering. He runs a marriage bureau for poor girls. He helps them get married without charging a fortune. He told me he only takes 300 rupees as a small fee for his travel costs. That's nothing if it means your future is secured. Her words didn't comfort me. Instead, they sent a chill down my spine. But Amma, I argued, our problem isn't just poverty, it's me. My appearance. What will he do about that? She sighed heavily, her shoulders sagging. Beta, he already saw you. He told me that he helps girls who are less fortunate in appearance as well. He said he has respectable, family-oriented boys in mind. I stared at her in disbelief. And you just told him about me? Without even knowing who he really is? My frustration spilled out, the fear of being judged by yet another stranger twisting in my chest. She nodded, her tone defensive yet weary. What was I supposed to do, Shagufta? When you left me alone, he started talking. He asked why I looked so unwell, and I ended up telling him everything. He seemed kind, Beta. Sometimes Allah sends help in unexpected ways. I couldn't find the words to counter her. Instead, I helped her into the rickshaw, and we rode home in a tense silence. That night, my mother fell into a deep sleep after taking her medication, but I remained by her bedside. My tears fell silently as I watched her. The fear of losing her was unbearable. She was all I had, my only family left. If she left me, what would become of me? My heart ached with every thought of our uncertain future. I knew the truth as much as it stung. Girls like me didn't get married easily. The world only wanted well-educated, beautiful brides from wealthy families. My father's death had left us in poverty, and I had inherited neither my mother's fair complexion nor my father's height and features. Instead, I resembled my aunt, and that resemblance had become my burden. It was as if I'd been marked, my appearance serving as a barrier to every chance at happiness. I had no siblings, no uncles or cousins to support us. My mother's family was distant, uninterested in our plight. I was utterly alone. Throughout that sleepless night, I cursed my reflection, my fate, and my helplessness. Why couldn't I have been born with my mother's beauty? Why did I have to carry these looks that no one found desirable? These questions haunted me until the first light of dawn. When my mother woke, she seemed better, her color returning, her spirits less burdened. We didn't mention the old man or the day's earlier events. Instead, we focused on the mundane, what needed to be cooked, what groceries were missing, and how to manage our dwindling funds. But as the clock struck 11, a sharp knock on the door shattered the fragile peace. My heart sank when I opened it. There he was, the same elderly man from yesterday. He smiled faintly, his gaze calm yet piercing. I quickly told my mother he was here, and she invited him inside. He seated himself respectfully on the charpoy, his demeanor polite, his voice steady. I spoke with a few families, he said, his eyes cast downward. Some respectable families who are only looking for a well-mannered, decent girl. They aren't concerned with wealth or looks. His words hung in the air like a promise, but something about them set my nerves on edge. My mother, oblivious to my growing unease, asked eagerly, "Did they seem interested?" The old man nodded. "Very interested. One family in particular is quite keen. They only want a simple, respectful daughter-in-law. If you agree, we can arrange a meeting soon." I couldn't hold my tongue any longer. "What guarantees do we have that they're genuine?" I asked, my voice firmer than I intended. "How do we know they're not just trying to take advantage of our situation?" The man looked at me for the first time since he'd arrived, his eyes sharp yet kind. "I've been doing this work for many years," he replied. "I help girls like you find good, honest husbands. I understand your hesitation, but I assure you these are decent people. I'll personally vouch for them." My mother clasped her hands together, her voice trembling. "Shagufta, this might be our chance. Allah has sent someone to help. Let's at least meet them." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust that this stranger could change my fate. But a nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered doubt. Why had he approached us so suddenly? Why had he taken such a keen interest in our situation? And why did his promises sound too good to be true? As much as I longed for a way out of this limbo, I couldn't ignore the unease curling in my chest. The elderly man sat politely in our modest courtyard, his demeanor as humble as the clothes he wore. His presence still felt odd, and I couldn't shake the unease lingering in my chest. Yet when he folded his hands and spoke, his words seemed earnest. He addressed my mother directly, with a respectful tone that left no room for questioning his intentions. "Sister," he began, "I don't have a photograph of your daughter, but if I could get one, it would make everything much simpler. If you don't mind, could you provide a picture of her? That way I could take it to the families I have in mind and bring you some good news soon." My mother nodded, her expression softening. "Brother," she replied, "why would I mind? You've come here to help us in our time of need. Of course, I'll provide her photograph." She turned to me and signaled for the photo. Reluctantly, I handed over an old picture of myself from 5 years ago. My mother passed it to him, and he held it carefully, as if it were a precious document. "Thank you," he said, smiling warmly. "Now, you don't have to worry. Your daughter is like my own daughter. Just wait and see. I'll bring back a very good match." My mother, though anxious, found comfort in his words. She reached into her bag and offered him 300 rupees as a token of thanks, but he quickly declined. "Sister," he said firmly, "I'll accept payment only after the match is confirmed. I'm not in a rush. This is something I do to help people. That's all." Despite his refusal, my mother insisted, "Please, take it. I know you must have spent on travel and fuel to get here. This isn't much, but I'd feel better if you accepted it." Reluctantly, he agreed, tucking the money into his pocket with a quiet, "Thank you." My mother added a final plea. "Please, just find someone decent and honorable. That's all we wish for." He smiled again, promising, "Sister, you have nothing to worry about. I'll find a match that's just right for her. No dowry demands, no unnecessary expectations. I only work with respectable families, so you can trust me." With that, he rose, bowed slightly, and left. But the unease that had been brewing inside me didn't leave with him. I turned to my mother, my voice filled with concern. "Amma, isn't it strange that he came to our house so quickly? Just last night you spoke to him at the hospital, and now here he is. What's the rush?" She shot me a stern look. "You're being ungrateful," she scolded. "This man is going out of his way to help us. Did you even look at his fee? It's just 300 rupees. Compare that to the other matchmakers we've tried. Those women charge thousands. Who else would do this for just 300 rupees? He's helping out of goodwill. Stop doubting him. Besides, we'll know soon enough if he's trustworthy. When a proposal comes, we'll see what kind of match he finds." Her words, though firm, did little to calm me. I couldn't shake the suspicion that he might be taking advantage of my mother's desperation. I was sure that after taking the 300 rupees, he wouldn't return. I thought he was just another fraud who preyed on vulnerable women like my mother. But I was wrong. The very next evening, the same elderly man appeared at our door again. This time, he wasn't alone. A middle-aged woman and a man accompanied him. Their expressions were polite and warm, but seeing them in our courtyard made my stomach churn. I froze for a moment before stepping forward. The old man smiled apologetically. "Daughter," he said, "I forgot to take your contact number last time, so I brought the boy's family here directly." The middle-aged woman's presence made me feel even more uneasy. My mother was out at the market, and I was caught off guard. I hastily invited them in and seated them on the charpoy in our courtyard. By the time my mother returned and saw them, she was visibly surprised. I had no time to clean up, and my disheveled appearance from cooking in the kitchen made me feel even more self-conscious. The woman introduced herself with a kind smile. Her voice was gentle, her tone honest. "We're not looking for a heroine," she said sincerely. "We just want a good wife for our son. Even if your daughter doesn't know how to cook or manage a household, that's no issue. What matters most to us is her character. We need someone who will fit in and maintain harmony in the family." Her straightforwardness caught me off guard. There was no pretense in her words, no hidden agenda. Even the man beside her nodded, adding, "We don't need a dowry or any material things. All we ask for is a simple, kind-hearted girl." Their simplicity and lack of demands left my mother visibly relieved. She joined them in conversation, her tone more hopeful than it had been in months. The elderly man smiled as he watched the exchange. "I told you," he said to my mother, "there are still decent families out there. I'm glad we found a family that values your daughter for who she is." I sat quietly, feeling a mixture of emotions. I wanted to trust them, to believe that their intentions were pure. But the scars of past rejections ran deep. I couldn't help but wonder if this too was too good to be true. As they continued talking, my mind raced. What would happen next? Could I finally hope for a future free of judgment? A future where I wouldn't be weighed down by my appearance or circumstances? Their visit ended on a positive note, and they promised to return soon for further discussions. My mother seemed more at peace, her anxiety momentarily lifted. As the visitors left, she turned to me, her eyes filled with cautious optimism. "Shagufta," she said, "I think this might be it. Allah willing, this time we'll find you a good home." For the first time in years, I felt a sliver of hope break through the cloud of doubt that had followed me all my life. My mother, who had been struggling for so long to find a good match, suddenly seemed to have found the perfect solution. The elderly man returned, accompanied by the boy's parents, who were just as simple and genuine as he had described. They brought a large box of sweets, their smiles radiating warmth and sincerity. When they set a picture of their son on the table, my mother's eyes widened with amazement. The boy was good-looking, well-mannered, and had a respectable job at a private company. He was their only son, and all they wanted was a kind, simple girl to be his bride. As they spoke, I could feel a glimmer of hope rising in my chest. I had grown so used to rejection and disappointment that it felt almost unreal to be considered a suitable match for someone like him. My mother was overjoyed, her excitement bubbling over as she listened to their straightforward, humble proposal. They left, giving us a week to think it over, but my mother needed no time at all. "Such a good match won't come along again," she told me, her voice trembling with excitement. Still, she wanted to be sure. The next day, she decided to check up on the boy herself. She took his photo and went directly to his office. The security guard at the gate, a man she had never met, immediately recognized the boy and spoke highly of him. "He's a very decent, respectable young man," he said. His words reassured my mother, and she returned home with her mind set. The following day, she called the elderly man and told him that we wanted to go ahead with the proposal. He promptly arranged for the boy's parents to visit us again that evening. When they arrived, they brought more sweets and a beautifully embroidered scarf for me. They placed it gently over my head and told my mother, "From this day forward, your daughter is our responsibility." Their kind words and thoughtful gesture brought tears to my mother's eyes. I was still in shock. It was hard to believe that something so wonderful had come to pass. My mother, thrilled and relieved, couldn't stop smiling. "I told you," she said. "Sometimes fortune knocks on your door so softly you don't even realize it at first. You doubted that elderly man, but look how he changed your destiny." With the wedding date set 6 months ahead, my mother began dreaming about a brighter future. She busied herself planning my modest trousseau, envisioning my married life with hope and joy. That night, we both went to bed early, exhausted but happy. "We'll start preparing tomorrow," my mother said, brushing a kiss on my forehead before retiring to her room. I fell asleep quickly, but the morning brought a rude awakening. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in my room anymore. I was lying on the cold, hard floor of a dimly lit, locked room. Panic gripped me as I struggled to understand what was happening. Where was I? How did I get here? My heart raced as the door creaked open, revealing the elderly man. His face wore a calm, almost kind expression as he stepped inside. "Good morning, my dear," he said, his voice gentle yet unsettling. "What's going on? Where am I?" I stammered, my voice shaking. "Don't worry," he replied smoothly. "You'll be home soon. We just need to complete a little procedure before your wedding. It's a simple checkup, nothing to be scared of." I stared at him, confused and frightened. "What kind of procedure?" I demanded, my hands clenching into fists. Instead of answering, he called out. A young woman entered, holding a tray with a syringe. Before I could react, she jabbed it into my arm. My head swam and I felt my body growing heavy. As my vision blurred, the elderly man leaned in close and said, "You see, I don't just arrange marriages. My fee isn't really 300 rupees. In exchange, I require one small thing, a kidney." My heart pounded in my chest, fear coursing through my veins. "What are you talking about?" I whispered, the words barely leaving my lips. He smiled, his tone disturbingly calm. "I'm a doctor, you see. I specialize in kidney transplants. I find donors, and you, my dear, are a perfect match. I knew the moment I saw you that you'd be ideal. The surgery will happen in a few hours. Don't worry, it'll be quick. After that, you'll be free to go home." His words hit me like a brick wall. I had been duped, betrayed in the worst possible way. The promise of a bright future, the kind words, the warmth, they had all been lies. As the room began to spin and darkness closed in, the last thing I saw was his face, still smiling as if he were doing me a favor. When I came to, a sharp pain radiated from my left side. I realized with dread that the surgery was over. They had taken my kidney. The old man reappeared, his expression calm and businesslike. "Your operation is done," he said matter-of-factly. "You'll get some money in return, and my men will drop you near your home. Your mother is so sick. Why worry about marriage? Stay with her and take care of her. You'll be happier that way. Normally, I don't send the girls back, but seeing your mother's condition, I decided to let you go home." Later that evening, they released me. A man drove me to a spot near my house and handed me an envelope containing cash. I stumbled the rest of the way home, my body weak and aching. When I finally reached my front door, my mother's shocked and tearful face greeted me. "Where have you been?" she sobbed. "You've been gone for 2 whole days." I was beside myself with worry. "I even reported you missing to the police, but there was no sign of you. It's been a nightmare." Through my own tears, I recounted everything. The old man, the surgery, the lies. My mother listened in stunned silence. Then, determined to hold someone accountable, she took me to the police station. There, I told the officers the entire story. Their faces grew grim as I described the man and the events leading up to the surgery. One of them shook his head. "This isn't the first complaint we've had," he said. "There's been a surge in organ trafficking around here. A few other women have come forward with similar stories. This old man lures them in by offering cheap marriage services. And then they vanish. Some haven't even made it back home. You're lucky to be here." They asked me to describe the man, and based on my account, they created a sketch. The officer assured us they'd investigate further. I wanted to believe them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that justice might never come. My mother and I returned home, knowing full well that the damage was already done. I had lost a vital part of myself, my kidney, and no amount of investigation could restore it. In the days that followed, my health began to decline. My mother sought help from the government hospital, where I started receiving treatment. I couldn't lift heavy objects, I couldn't walk long distances, and even drinking enough water had become a challenge. My life had changed forever. I thought often about how I had taken my body's health for granted before. I had obsessed over my physical appearance, complaining about my dark skin, my short stature, and my plain features, without ever appreciating that I had been healthy. My focus on what I didn't have had blinded me to the blessings I did have. Losing my kidney was a painful reminder of just how fragile and precious health is. From that day on, I made a conscious effort to be more grateful. Even though I had lost something irreplaceable, I still had many blessings to count. I realized that gratitude isn't about ignoring hardship. It's about acknowledging the good that still remains. Life had tested me in ways I could never have imagined, but I found strength in knowing that I could still stand, still breathe, and still move forward. Although the physical and emotional scars would always remain, I resolved to live my life with a renewed sense of appreciation. The old man had taken something from me that I could never regain, but he also gave me a powerful lesson. Never underestimate the value of what you already have.